fiction. We got this email from Don DeLillo's like manager. It was like, you have to get copyright to use our material. And we were like, okay, but like the copyright law says we can use 400 words or less or something. And what if it's like obstructed in sound, like you don't even know what we're saying? And we just kept getting these responses in all caps from
oh my God, that's so serious.
And so we were like, well, what if instead of Don DeLillo's text, we use this email as... So that's what we did. So it was like we created this... I don't know how this is answering your question.
No, I love it.
Thanks for coming over.
Oh, thanks for having me. Yeah. It's I can't remember why I was here last, but I love your place. It's really beautiful.
Thank you. I love it too.
I feel like there's a lot of things that represent who you are.
Oh, really?
Place. Yeah.
Tell me, say more about that.
Like, there's lots of photos of Stanley.
There are so many. There's even a watercolor, a custom watercolor.
It's beautiful. Yeah. I don't know. I feel like I don't know whether you've painted things or not, but it feels very bright and open and welcoming. And there's elements of color, elements of, beautiful furniture.
Oh, stop.
I'm a big fan of interior design.
Yeah? Okay. Well, let's nerd out on that later.
Yeah. I wish that, like, we're living downstairs and it's sort of, we renovated a bit and kind of built some things, but it's obviously like quite dark just because I constantly crave light. So whenever I go to places where there's like actually windows that are facing towards the sun and things like that, it feels really beautiful.
It does get very hot. The west facing. Yeah,
that's the only downside.
Yeah. But you're right. You're only human. You want that light.
You want that light. And it's really good for you.
It really is.
I've been reading.
Yeah. I guess I grew up in a really rainy climate.
Right.
So to have this like constant or consistent sun and all of this, just like not rainy, not overcast weather. Yeah. It's a luxury.
Where did you originally, where were you born and where, so you're obviously born in America, but
I grew up in Seattle.
In Seattle, okay.
Outside
so
of
super
Seattle.
Rainy then.
Super rainy, yeah. And it never gets too cold. It just gets cold enough to be miserable and dreary.
Right.
The summers are beautiful because it rains so much, so it's green and lush.
Yeah.
But very, I would say like actually the vibe is similar. Maybe the same kind of energy or the size. Brisbane and Seattle, I find a lot of, there's a lot of comparisons, but weather-wise, it's just a whole different.
Right. Yeah. And so you within Seattle, where was your sort of first like musical experiences? What made you want to do the things that you're doing now?
Great question. Well, I started learning piano, which I hated when I was a child. But I think I like really took to understanding pitch and melody. I struggled a lot with like the left hand. So then I started playing flute and it was like, I remember being so bored. Like, oh my God, can we just speed things up and learn new things?
Yeah.
And I don't know, continued with music in high school and then decided that's what I wanted to concentrate at university. I went to university nearby where I grew up, a place in Tacoma, which is south of Seattle. So not far from home, but I did then move to New York and I did a master's degree in Manhattan and I decided like this is my focus for what I want to do for my career. Yeah. I would say like, well, let's see, what's the first thing I did? I don't know. I started playing a lot of classical music as you do.
Yeah.
Played flute. had dreams of playing in an orchestra or having some similar classical career.
Yeah.
And then when I moved to New York, I realized like, oh, I can write my own music or do like weirder creative things.
Yeah.
So I did a contemporary performance program studying new music, more like, you know, modern art music that was written within the 20th and 21st century.
Yeah.
And then I started this, I'll call it a band. Yeah. It was a band. Yeah. It was an ensemble. It was a trio with two other people that I was studying with, Tristan McKay and Megan Burke. Tristan plays piano and Megan plays cello.
Cool.
And we started a band called Dead Language, where we would commission our friends to write us music, and then we started improvising and writing our own stuff.
Awesome.
And this is where I started to play with everyday objects, or like try to find the humor in such a serious tradition. Because like
it's really serious.
Playing modern art music, you're like, wait a minute.
Yeah.
When do we get to laugh? You don't.
No.
So we decided, you're not allowed. There's no fun or enjoyment.
No.
And we wanted to find the fun and enjoyment in what we were doing. So I don't know. I would say like a vivid memory of mine with Dead Language. There are many, but one of the most notable is that we were doing this residency over the summer at this chamber. I won't say names. We were doing a chamber music residency, and we were there. There was like a string quartet, and there was this early music ensemble, and we were all having so much fun. Yeah. And then we had this like showcase at the end of what we were doing to show what we were working on. And we just had like the weirdest, like most sarcastic thing. Yeah. And some of the feedback we got from like the people who ran the residency was like, you know, you're actually really talented on your instruments. Maybe you should just stick to like the
stop taking the piss.
Yeah. And we were like, hell no.
Yeah. That's what makes it fun. Yeah. I totally agree. There's not enough fun in music a lot of the time, but also, especially in like contemporary art music from the 20th and 21st century for sure. It is very serious, which is weird. I always find it weird because it's like all of those things tended to rebel against like the tradition or the institution or blah, blah, blah. But it's become its own institution in thinking and in like performance etiquette and what you're allowed to do and there's always outliers, I suppose. But that's not like the common thing. Yeah. It's like we're playing this music really seriously, and which is cool on some level, I think. But yeah, I think there has to be an element of fun or like not taking it so serious or not even taking yourself so seriously that it's like you need to like relax and enjoy things when you can, you know.
And I think I learned a lot through learning that type of music. Yeah. So pushing myself within, you know, technical ability. Yeah. And also just learning like the standards of what it means to operate at that level as a musician. And I think it's only then can you like dial it back and be like, okay, I've decided what is and isn't for me. Yeah. So much respect. And there's a time and place for seriousness everywhere. Sure. There's also a time and place for serious silliness everywhere. And that's where I want to be most of the time.
Yeah. I love that. And I feel like it's something that it's been very inspiring to watch your journey from since I've met you, like going and as far and as deep into that as you're going is amazing, and it's really inspiring.
That's sweet because I've known you for a long time.
I was thinking like today, it's been really interesting chatting to friends like on this podcast and kind of realizing how long I've known people. It's been a while now, and it's like it doesn't feel like that. It feels like sort of everything's going quickly, but I remember like chatting to you when you were sort of looking at doing a PhD and kind of focusing deeper on these things, and also me sort of being like, I'm not sure where that's going to go, but I'm really excited to see where. And it's like, it's sort of like you've built this world around the things that make you really happy and the things that you're really interested in your work. And I feel like you're someone that's like, at least from what I'm on the outside as a mate, you know, it's like, I feel like a lot of people do their PhD in something that they feel like they have to research or that's like hip or important or something, but then it doesn't always extend into their practice. Whereas I feel like you're someone that's like, regardless of whether you did a lot of research within that area or not, you were wanting to explore that regardless and implement that more into your practice, which is like, I think the best way to approach that sort of thing. Like, I know I'm like, I am so not there yet in terms of what I'm wanting to look at, just because I'm like flipping around everywhere. But it's been interesting seeing friends that are going into that, and some people make it out and don't ever touch what they're researching ever again.
I mean, it's a big project that you probably get sick of. But I think it's a luxury to find something that you want to stay curious about. And like, okay, there's some elements of my research or my study that I'm like, maybe I'm ready to move on from that. But it's always evolving, like it's building on itself. The objects thing, I think it's funny you said that. I've built this world around all of this silliness, but I think the world is built around me. Like it's found me in some way. I wouldn't have imagined that this could be my life, or this, like I could find so much joy in the music that I'm making or working with people and creating, I don't know, very curious and surprising and magical things. So it is a luxury.
And I think that is, whether it's intentional or not, and I'm sure it's a bit of both, it connects with a huge and wide and deep audience that I think contemporary, experimental, like whatever you want to call it, music with objects, like it could be something else that is very serious and very sits in a very small window of certain people go to see it and other people don't. Whereas I feel like because of your approach and the way that you are, the person that you are, it's like, it's very welcoming and very open, and like, I think there needs to be way more of that, especially in that sort of music, you know.
Caleb, that's like actually the best compliment I could. Well, it's welcoming. So a few things happened for me that I think maybe have invited this welcoming sense. I changed my perspective of who I was making music for. So I guess when I was playing composed music by other people and commissioning, which was very, very dear to me, and still that music is still dear to me, the audience was more limited. It was like the music was accessible, but the type of person who would buy a ticket to go see that type of music, it was like a narrow audience. So I kind of was like, oh, what if I make music for a 3-year-old and still keep that commitment to being seriously silly, but serious about what I'm doing? So that, you know, like what would a younger person want to see? How might that change my approach in what I'm making? The audience, or like thinking about who's accessing this, was a big thing that I decided to let go of. And then also, I think notated music, or like how I conceptualized what it means to do experimental music. So I started focusing more on visual things or interdisciplinary ways of making music. And then that combined with like the audience consideration, it's silly.
It's awesome though. And I think like, I'm a bit, I don't want to make this comparison because they're two different things, but the approach in terms of the openness and the considering the audience and the age of the audience and the scope of the audience and things like that, it's super weird, but I watched a little clip of a Sesame Street clip this morning, and I don't know why. Buried deep in my brain was this Sesame Street scene that I must have seen when I was like 5 or 6 or something. And they're like these two aliens, and they discover this telephone and they're trying to work out what sound it makes.
Oh my God, that's my life.
And so it's super weird that I saw this video this morning, and they have these really funny like looking mouths, and they just keep saying yep, or no, for like what sound the telephone will make. And so they're making like cow sounds and they're making chicken sounds and then eventually it rings and then they start mimicking the telephone sound and then as if they're, chatting to it. But Georgia and I, we were just in bed watching it because I said that quote to her, not realizing, I was like, where is that from? And I realized it was from Sesame Street. But we were both just completely transfixed for like the 3-minute video that this was. And it just made me think like how many levels this is hitting, similar to like The Simpsons or something where it's like it's created by people that are very, very intellectual. They feel a lot of things and they've thought very hard about their practice. But if anyone, it translates to so many different people in the sense of I can gain many deep lessons out of this about communication or about it could translate to like how languages work together or like, friction between language barriers or blah, blah, blah. Or to a kid, it's just funny and like it hits everyone. And I feel like a lot of music that is being made within that sphere, but also in general, is for a certain small niche audience. And we're kind of taught that that's like, tends to be a good thing because then you can really double down and try and, work with that audience. But I feel like your approach is similar to those sorts of things where it's like you're coming at it from a very like considered point of view, but in the doing and the performing of it, it's like very fun and very silly, but it's very considered in terms of like the thought behind everything,
Yeah. So I think what you're talking about is like relatability. So how we can find this sense of or this intersection of like, oh, I understand what's going on, and maybe the way that it's being done is kind of silly, but there's so much message behind it. Two things. So Tim Monroe, who's an incredible flautist, he said to me once, like, oh, if you create something for a 3-year-old, you make it for everyone. So again, there's the relatability, even though like it's accessible to someone very young, it still has a very like wise message.
Yes.
And then also Eric Griswold, another incredible human. I remember 10 years ago when I moved here, 10 years ago.
Oh my God.
Yeah. I played at the Festival of Toy Music that Vanessa Tomlinson and Eric Griswold put on. Was
Margaret playing?
Margaret Langton was playing. And I was doing a set with my trio Dead Language, who flew from New York to Australia. So fun. My cheeks hurt from smiling that day. But he said to me, I think I said something about like, oh, this is just, we'll just have a really silly set. And he was like, no, this is seriously silly. And he just like have this.
I can just imagine how he would say that.
The delivery of it. And I use that term now, like seriously silly, because it really does reflect the level of consideration that is put into this type of music, even though it is meant to be lighthearted and relatable.
Yeah. I think that's amazing. And I think like that idea of changing your perspective of who you're making things for, that it's funny that we sort of got there, but that was one of sort of a big thing that I wanted to chat about. And I guess like, how does that extend further, like outside of music? Because I know you're someone, I was chatting to Beck, our mutual friend Beck, amazing percussionist and thinker and all the things. It was sort of it was like a couple of months ago, kind of pre me going to therapy. So I was in a pretty shit spot, but I was just talking about how I don't feel it's changed now, but I didn't really have the capacity to make music. It just kept reminding me, anything that I was making was reminding me like how much time I'd had away from it. And so I wasn't enjoying anything that I was making and felt like it was a waste of time, blah, blah. But she was like, you should talk to Jodie because and you should hear her perspective on these things because like she mentioned something about the idea of like, because I'm someone that I try not to let my music be the only thing that represents me as a person, but it's hard not to. But that's changed a lot in the last few months as well, going to therapy and kind of realizing there's other things outside of making shit. But I guess like, what's your perspective on those things? And I feel like it's extending outside of your artistic practice because that's something that you've clearly thought a lot about on how to approach it. And I assume that sort of extends further out, within all the elements of your life.
So you mean like the relationship you have with
your creative practice and making things like, I can tell you what Beck said, something along the lines of like, you have to be doing this sort of stuff and living for a larger purpose than just making stuff, And I think for me, like, that has been my only purpose to live for a while, is just to like make things. But then that places a huge amount of pressure on the final product, which doesn't matter at all. It's the process is so important. The
process, and I think the relationships that you build with yourself and other people in how you make the music or make whatever it is that you're making. Yeah. Wow, I feel like I have a lot to say. I don't even know where to start. I'll first talk, maybe this will help me warm into more of a discussion on it, but I'll say a bit about establishing a new relationship with my instrument. So I started playing classical flute, and I still do. I still play gigs in an orchestra, and I really enjoy that. But I think sometimes it's hard for me to understand my identity as a composer and experimental performer when I'm playing flute versus when I play objects. And the objects are so fun and accessible and like curious, where the flute has like this set tradition of how it's meant to sound. There's lots of very intelligent and talented people who extend that in contemporary or like, new music practice. But there still is this kind of standard or tradition of virtuosity or excellence. And this is something that's a big part of my research, is like unlearning that mastery unmastery. Unlearning virtuosity because it doesn't serve us in the way of how to connect with other people. Something that I'm always applying to my creative practice that I research is a concept called companion thinking. So we're in company with the objects and the spaces and the people, the environments that we're working with. So it's not like you versus something else, or you in the space of something else. The space is influencing you. So I've done a lot of research with Hannah Reardon Smith about this. So we've written articles and presented. And I'm now realizing that this is like a framework that I can apply to any project I'm working on. And it helps me remember, like, every time I come up against some friction or something that's difficult, I remember I'm working with that hard thing, whatever it might be. So it helps the challenges seem more like a game or seem more like a conversation or dialogue to work something out. For sure. And that's, I don't know, it's hard to step back and remember sometimes. When you're in the middle of a project with deadlines and stress and all that sort of stuff. And when we make stuff for a living, we do have deadlines, we do have expectations, and so feeling like your audience or the receptivity or how it is that you're making the process that you're making it isn't always as it doesn't always go in a flowing way or a creative way. Like we have to put these limitations or these standards on it, and that's difficult. So making for the sense of making, I love that. I also love making for the sense of doing it with other people or on a timeline or within a budget. That's a challenge in itself. But I feel like there was more that you wanted to discuss.
It was something that was sort of present in my mind this morning, only because I remember that conversation. But I feel like I'm sort of in that zone at the moment of trying to sort of discover or like uncover those things again. And I talked to Georgia a lot about this. She studied flute also.
We're everywhere.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. And she doesn't really play anymore much. But she has been sort of developing this songwriting practice and playing a lot of bass and sort of going deep into that. And at first, this was like a couple of years ago when we sort of moved out together just before COVID hit, which was, we got very lucky. But that sort of kicked off this big songwriting process because before that it was sort of like she was enjoying it, but she was playing flute still in a serious way and all that sort of thing. And I feel like that sort of, it challenged me like from the outside of like, what are you doing? Like you studied this thing and like, you know, like you're really great at playing this instrument. Why move away? And it challenged me a lot. Obviously I was like, of course, you know, go for it, do whatever you need to do.
Yeah.
But it brought up a lot of things within me as well of like, because I studied classical percussion, I don't really play in that realm much at all.
And that's okay.
Yeah, that's fine. Yeah. And that's taken me a long time to kind of be all right with that. Whereas now I sort of play a lot of drum kit and in bands and, you know, do all that sort of thing more. But it got me thinking like that idea of, and I don't know how much like the institution of studying that music and studying classical music and how to conduct yourself and all that sort of thing within that. It's been like the people that I've chatted to who have done a classical degree, it's been very interesting hearing their perspectives on it, because a lot of us have sort of moved away from that tradition and haven't gone into the orchestral side of things, or we still play chamber music, but sort of more so in a I don't know.
It's in a different capacity.
Yeah, it's in a different place, you know. And I feel like a lot of we're the lucky ones in the sense of like we've gotten out before it's become so ingrained with like as in, not to take anything away from orchestral musicians. I think they are incredible in the way that they create music together and all that sort of thing. I know for me, I find it very challenging now to even think about like being in that particular zone.
Me too.
And again, that comes with a lot of things, but I feel like a lot of those situations are reflections of maybe what we were taught during that time of like, you must do these sorts of things and you can't push against these particular walls because, you know, these things. And I don't want to like make it a giant classical music slag off, but it's honestly taken me 10 years to unlearn so many like lessons that I think impacted me pretty negatively as a musician.
I think it would take you that long to unlearn. So I'll say that that tradition of music from an educational or a training standpoint, I think is incredible.
Yeah, amazing.
And we're so deep in it from the point of the canon or like the curriculum that we learn. And I think it's only, I think it's necessary that some people stay within it and the other people decide like, oh, well, actually I'm going to take these things that I learned and apply it into a different method or a different way of creating music.
Yeah.
And it's hard to get around the like, oh, well, I studied this thing so much. Why am I not still doing this thing? At the same time, though, like we've learned these skills and these networks that we have, and now we're doing something different with it. And I wonder, like, what if no one did something different with it?
Yeah.
And we wouldn't have this progression or evolution or growth.
Of course. And
I, again, thinking about like, who's this music for? And how are we active participants within our community as musicians, as performers, as artists, unless we are exploring new things and doing something that is written for the community or activates the community in some way, other than doing something that's of a classical music tradition. And not to say that classical music doesn't already do that. I still compose what would be contemporary classical music at certain points in time. but yeah, I just finished this huge project where I taught people how to play the kazoo.
Yes.
And I was gathering people around the silliness, but also like, you know, helping people confront the vulnerability of using their own voice through a very silly and joyful means, which was the kazoo.
Yeah.
And I look back on that and think, wow, I don't think I could have been a workshop leader or known how to engage people in creating something unless I had this music degree, unless I had all this training and these experiences that range from classical music up to what I'm doing now.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. And I think that's the interesting part of it all is, I think if you train in anything, it's you can reflect back on it and you can be a harsh critic or you can see like the benefits. And without it, I know for me, I wouldn't approach music in the same way if I didn't study classical music. And I'm very thankful for those things. And of course, like with anything, there's positives and negatives, I'm sure, and it depends on your view. And that view for me has changed quite a lot in terms of like, it used to be a very negative thing of like, what am I doing? Like, what is this, like this particular thing and way of thinking has like kind of made me very judgmental and negative. But then after like, doing loads of therapy, I realized it's like, those things didn't come from classical music. They're like deeply embedded in myself and, you know, I need to work on those things, which I am. But it's therapy. That's therapy. Oh my God. Yeah. Love it. Yeah. It's, been life-changing. But realizing that like that form of critique, like for me, tends to be on the negative side only because it allows me to understand things really deeply. But then I've let that radiate out and that sort of, you know, become reasonably negative in the views, but then realizing that it's like, you know, I can be critical, but I can also, I don't need to like hate things.
I mean,
it's too easy
go on.
Yeah. Oh, for sure. Like, you know, that, we all have things that annoy us, but realizing that like, I think without that training, I wouldn't have made the decisions to like move away from it, I think. And I think I would have felt even more pressure to kind of move into that sphere out of obligation rather than, And I guess
we can't move away from something unless we're already in it or nearby it. Sure. So that's the irony of it. This is the biggest question I'm asked when talking about my research with unlearning or unmastery. It's like, well, you know, how can someone unlearn it if they haven't learned it yet, right? So it's a process of undoing. And I wonder all the time, like, oh, well, what is there to unlearn if you haven't learned it? But I think it's a reminder to have a different perspective. It's always challenging ourselves to view things from a different angle.
Yeah. You mentioned something a little while ago, which has just disappeared out of my brain. That always happens.
Those are relatable fields.
Yeah. What was it? Anyway, it'll come back. But oh yes, I remember. So going back just a teeny bit in the lineage of Jodie Rottle.
Oh no. Don't go back too far.
We'll go back to like maybe masters, only because you mentioned that thing where you were saying that you were pushing, like you'd sort of studied classical music in a pretty heavy way up until there. And then that idea of like pushing as far as you can into the experimental lands and improvisation and contemporary classical music and all of those things. And then you sort of mentioned like you went to this place and then sort of pulled it back into a place where you felt comfortable in terms of what you liked about it and taking elements that then informed your practice more. I guess like, how did you find improvising with people and solo or those sorts of things and playing music that was very different to playing in an orchestra? What were some of the lessons that pulled out of that then you've applied to like your approach now? Like,
not everyone's going to like what you're doing.
Yeah.
And I think this is a life lesson that's transferred into all areas of like outside of my musical career. And that's sometimes a hard reminder to myself, like, okay, I'm not going to please everyone, or what I'm, okay. So examples, when only like 4 or 5 people show up to your gig.
Love that.
Cool. Love it. Experimental music. And I'm thinking also of a time, where I was working with Dead Language, and we did this show at the Center for Fiction in New York. And so we were fusing literature with this concept that we were creating. So we were using this White Noise by Don DeLillo. We were being inspired by some of the like tongue-in-cheek or more abstract parts of that book. And we decided to use some of the text as abstractly. So I was like speaking into my flute, and it was kind of like hidden. And then we got this email from, because we were advertising it through the Center for Fiction, we got this email from Don DeLillo's like manager. It was like, you have to get copyright to use our material. And we were like, okay, but like the copyright law says we can use 400 words or less or something. And what if it's like obstructed in sound, like you don't even know what we're saying? And we just kept getting these responses in all caps from
Oh my God, that's so serious.
And so we were like, well, what if instead of Don DeLillo's text, we use this email as... So that's what we did. So it was like we created this... I don't know how this is answering your question.
No, I love it.
But yeah, it was like... It's like this trail where, you upset someone and then you're like, oh, well, okay, I'll just change my ways and do something different. But what you've created along the way is actually so beautiful. I remember doing shows with Kupka's Piano. We did this, which was an ensemble that I played in here in Brisbane with some incredible performers. Contemporary classical sextet. And we were doing a radio play by... It was a Beckett radio play, and it was part of QMF. And like the publisher mandated that we preserve the concept of a radio play, so we had to do it behind a curtain, which I loved.
Whoa,
it was like
awesome.
I get to play without having to like have people watch me. And so we did that, and we could hear people leaving halfway through because they were just like disengaged, and it was like really weird text that was like this Beckett. But I was like, I love what I'm doing right now, and I don't really mind. And so I think that perseverance or like resilience building of knowing that I'm not going to please everyone as long as I'm happy with what I'm doing. But that is really hard when you don't have the external validation, or you have to, you just have to find your companions, find the people that do support you. And even, with this kazoo project that I did recently, I showed up for a workshop once, and like the people there were like not interested. And I found it hard to like bring my peppy, engaging self to this environment where people didn't want to participate. So again, like, and that's out of my control.
Yeah, for sure. I feel like, I've learned similar lessons through that. Oh, like, super low audience and shit like that. But yeah, it's great because it obviously challenges your, like, why am I doing this? And it's most of the time because I want to, and that's enough. And I feel like a lot of people who have found improvisation and new music and things like that after studying classical music I don't want to generalize, but tend to push into those zones and then find a place where they like to sit after. Like, I know for me, like, there was a period where I would only sort of do improvised gigs and super like weird like fluxus operations and all that sort of shit, which I loved. Just mainly because it was like challenging people and challenging their perspective of what music is and all that sort of thing. And I don't sort of occupy that place as much anymore, but I feel like all those values tend to seep into everything that I'm doing in terms of like it's okay if not everyone enjoys this, and not sort of always like, it's like that idea of like making things for like considering the audience and not considering them, and you're considering them by not you know what I mean? Like, as in, if you're giving the performance that you feel comfortable with, it's like people will receive that however they receive that. And I feel like when I meet people who haven't sort of done too much of that, they tend to be a little bit more brittle in terms of validation and kind of, I don't know, again, I don't want to generalize, but I feel like there's a bit of sort of diva vibes going on sometimes, where it's like they need external validation through clapping and all that sort of stuff to be like, I did a good job. And I feel like that can be a little bit of a scary place to be. And I feel like improvisation or playing music that's more challenging just to the general, you know, audience member, I think teaches you a lot as a performer and as a composer or an improviser or whatever about where your values lie.
Definitely agree. I think the context of how and where I perform now has helped me kind of shake the need to do things correctly.
Yeah.
So again, I think it's only human that, or at least from my experience, I want to do things the right way.
Yeah.
Like if I'm going to do something, I'm going to learn how to do it, and I'm going to do it as informed or like knowledge-based as possible. So now I'm like, well, what if I do things where there isn't really a right way? Like I won't be bound to that limitation. So I find myself performing in different contexts where I'm not on a stage, or I'm not like working with other people in the same way that has been done before. So, and this has offered me opportunities to do things like collaborating with circus groups. We've performed in site-specific places, sure. Like at the piano mill. Writing music for like unexpected places, like a moving minibus. Or I've recently wrote a work for shadow puppets, and
amazing.
That's awesome. That's coming out soon.
Cool.
And then also thinking about like how I'm interacting with audience members. So I have a work that's a one-on-one interaction called Your Sound Future, where I tell someone's sonic fortune. And it's very intimate. There's no clapping at the end, but there's like a very, very strong connection you have with one person. And I remember that being like such a risk for me, because I thought, well, I'm not like a clairvoyant or anything. Like, can I really claim to be doing this? But the concept was engaging and tactile, so people get to choose objects, and then they do this like chatterbox little prompt, and then I improvise based on the prompt and the objects they've chosen. And it's always like, again, it's up to chance, and it's one-on-one. And I remember doing this at the Listening Museum. Were you at the Listening Museum? And
I played those.
At the end of it, like, we were shutting things down, but people were still in line for my...
Can I have my future told?
And it was actually like, that was the only validation I needed. I didn't need clapping. I didn't need like a review. I just needed to know that people like were excited about
into it. And I think like those sorts of things, especially those kinds of performances where it's not a traditional, you know, performance setup of like audience and performer sitting opposite each other, I think instantly breaks down those things. But I don't think everyone has the opportunity to explore those things. Like, I don't think it's shown to a lot of young students, especially, that's like the thing that like you can do this if you want to, and it might be like super scary, but it teaches you a lot of things. Like, I know at the Listening Museum as well, I was playing all these Fluxus pieces, like bashing like rolls of newspaper on the ground until they like disappeared, and then that was the end of the piece, and we'd walk off, and people just like didn't know
like what is going on,
why are you doing?
And I think that's the point.
Like, which is great, like, you know, and Fluxus, obviously those sorts of things are probably more to like push a reaction or something, but I guess along a similar thread on some level of like trying to break down some of those barriers. And I think there should. It's funny that like that particular situation of like playing music in a operational like warehouse that makes giant outdoor art installations,
outdoor sculptures,
that like that a lot of people came, and probably was a really interesting and weird experience for people in the best way. But then if you transplant that same thing for like a band playing in a warehouse, so many people would go wild and be very excited by that in a different way. And I just find it's interesting, like even the same concept with different musics happening can trigger different responses, but both have the thread of being a lot more open-minded and a lot more receptive, like regardless of the music, just because it's not in like a concert hall or it's not in a venue or something like that. I'm
the location, the
Yeah.
conventions of how you experience that music, or like what type of person is interested in experiencing that music. Yeah, I think that says a lot to like, there's like cultural or social protocol of how we do things. And I love subverting that.
Yeah.
I've even recently thought about at what points in my life am I also quote unquote performing when I'm not actually thinking about performing. So I'm doing a lot of lecturing lately.
Yes.
And sometimes I think about my lecturing style and like how I can improve or relay information differently or in a better way. And I realized recently that that's a level of performing, and like, having this like arc of how you deliver information or are relating to your students, or even like putting knowledge or information into a way that is understandable from different perspectives. I've also started singing a karaoke song every day in my office.
Yes.
Which sadly I think is how I use my gear more than writing music lately. But I get my microphone set up and I'm just like, you know what? I love karaoke. If you know me, you know that. But I just choose a song and like belt it out. And then I'm like, all right, let's get on with the day.
What a great way to start the day.
And sometimes I tell people this and they're like, well, who's listening to you? And I'm like, no one. My dog and me. And like, it doesn't matter. I'm still going through this motion of like delivering something or experiencing the process of singing, which is just fun. And it doesn't have to be, it doesn't have to be a performance, I guess, but I'm still performing in some way.
Absolutely. Yeah. I think that's a really interesting concept. I feel the same way when I'm like, lecturing or tutoring or whatever, where it's like, it's not me like right now. It's like someone else, or like a different side of myself that's way more performative and like gives way less fucks most of the time. But that approach of like, how can I translate knowledge? How can I make this interesting and engaging and funny? And I can inspire someone. Like that's a very different approach to kind of just like being, not in that zone. And it's almost like, I know for me, when that click happens of like, I'm deciding that I'm performing now. It's like, something happens and it's
the
like,
lights go down,
the lights
curtain.
go down and it's like, nothing else matters. Like I don't have any feelings anymore in terms of like whatever anyone says, it doesn't matter. But then outside of that, it's like I'm way too, susceptible to all those things.
It's a vulnerable space.
Yeah.
Do you perform with like a moniker or an alias? Because I don't. And I wonder, how do people like, I don't know, how do you assume a different persona?
Yeah. I'm having a major identity crisis at the moment with all that shit.
Say more.
So maybe that's like a thing to chat on. Like, I've always struggled performing under my own name. I don't know why. Georgie's very similar and she like can't perform under her own name. It's kind of weird, but I can relate really heavily to her approach as well. But yeah, for me, it's like I've had so many different monikers that I've performed under for different music projects. And it's become a thing where I've gotten so sick of doing that because it's like I go way too far with it, where I'll like I have this idea and I'm like, cool, that sounds like a great idea. I'm gonna like create this entire visual language around it. I'm gonna like make a new email for it. I'm gonna make a new Instagram profile for it. I'm gonna blah blah. But I do all of that, but then I don't actually do the project.
So you like the idea of reinventing yourself.
So I've been writing all those ideas down, but not actually kind of executing them. But a lot because of like musically where I tend to operate, there's like, for me, my name tends to be like the composition thing. And maybe if I'm like improvising or I'm playing with someone in a contemporary music space or something like that, I'm happy to, that's me, you know. But then if I make beats or something, that's like a different name. Or if I'm playing in a band that I like, this sort of new project that I'm looking at, working more on is sort of more like led by me. And so I'm like, that's not really, to me in my brain, that's not like improvising like solo Caleb. It's like something else.
Right.
And it's a little bit scary not scary, but like my name feels like not appropriate for that.
This is so interesting.
Thing. Like
I'm the complete opposite.
I know. And I envy people that it's like, I can't possibly perform under, because it's like, I would love everything to just be bundled under my name. And it's weird that like, it's not weird. It's just like, I find it very hard to accept that the beats that I'm making and the compositions that I'm writing and the music that I'm recording, or like me playing in some other random project, is like, it's all me. But it's like, I guess I think of it more as like, how is this going to confuse people? And
that's valid.
And so I guess like with the band thing, it's like, well, I feel like that needs to be a different thing, only because the visual language that I'm developing is like very different to like the serious compositional kind of side of things. So yeah,
I think that's maybe it helped, maybe having these aliases or these other like names that you're known by, maybe that actually helps you push your musical creativity even further. Like you aren't limited by like, oh, I have to do things that represent who I am.
Absolutely.
Because I can take on this new persona. So maybe it is a beneficial
it's helpful
thing.
It's definitely helpful because I can kind of sidestep a lot of those things. Because I'm like singing a bit more and like sort of doing things that are like very out of my comfort zone, which is intentional, because it's like I feel like I'm playing guitar and blah blah. So it's like all these things that are very different to a lot of the other things that I do, and so it's easier for me to just take risks in that when I don't have my name associated with it.
I love that, like I love the concept of the novice. Not novice performer, but the novice sound maker. Like, and I feel like a novice many times when I'm playing. I don't know. People like give me objects. They find things at the op shop or in the trash or whatever, and they're like, "Hey, I thought you could make some sound with this." And so I have boxes in a room full of just stuff that sometimes I'm like, what, I don't know when I'll use this, but I know I will. But I always feel like, well, do I really know how to do that? And I have to wrestle with that perfectionist of like doing it the right way. So like allowing myself the opportunity to just explore or be curious and not put the limitation of like, oh, I have to be a very well-learned musician here. So just embracing that, like, doing all these things.
For sure. Because it's like, I was saying that to George yesterday in terms of like, I've been practicing like guitar and stuff like that. And I play it, but not, super well. And I'm like writing on it a lot more. So I'm obviously hitting technical facility things.
We all do.
Oh my God. Which has been great, because it's like, I haven't felt that way with playing drums, only because the things that I play on drums a lot of the time aren't, the challenges aren't in the doing, it's more in like the musical approach or like the restriction a lot of the time. Because they're like sort of indie rock songs. It's not like super challenging, but which is great, in one setting, but it's not like you're a novice musician, because you're trained and like you've learned all of these approaches and you have ideals around music that you can apply to to playing something that maybe you've never played before or something that's new, which I think is different to approaching it in a way of like if you haven't studied music or you haven't been taught music, that's very different. I got confronted with this the other day.
Tell me more.
And
who confronted you? Why? Where were you?
I've been marking these students' drafts at the moment. And this particular subject that I'm teaching is like an intro to music technology. So it's like anyone can do it. And we teach them like basic Ableton things.
Anyone can do it.
Anyone can do it. Yeah.
Anyone can.
Anyone can do it for sure. And like we teach them all these things, mainly sort of to unlock a bit of technical facility within the program. And then their final assessment is like they have to make 2 to 3 minutes of music or a podcast. Then most of them are doing music stuff. And some of them like don't like there's zero musical theory stuff. Not that it's necessary, but that's been super interesting because it's brought up this concept of like some of these things are incredible that they've made. Some of them are like horrible in the lens of like, you know, if you're writing a song, maybe there's another thing that you could probably explore, but
we'll start somewhere.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And that's not the point of this whole thing. It's just like, can you make some bleepy bloops in Ableton? And that's awesome. And maybe it kickstarts that journey. So obviously I'm not like coming in being like, this is like dog shit or something, but it's brought up some really interesting points of view of like technically these things like clash super hard and musically it might not be the best choice, but it's created something that's like very different to someone who has learnt a bunch of music theory and then applying it. And like, yes, it might sound really beautiful, but it's like informed by all of these things. And it just, brought up this thing of like, obviously you don't need to go study music to be a musician. That's not the thing, but the idea of approaching music and the things that you make, whether you're trained or not trained, and how that like kind of translates. And obviously one is not better than the other, but hearing like, 60 drafts or something of people that a lot of them have zero like ability in terms of technical facility or musical theory knowledge or something. But then the things they make are like pretty incredible to me, only because it's like they don't have anything holding them back in terms of like the idea around music. Yeah. Obviously like the facility is the restriction only because it's new to them. But I thought it was a really interesting thing that I've been confronting of like, I'm not here to judge their work. I'm here to mark their facility on these things. Yeah. But of course, as a creative person, I find it hard to not have opinions on them. And
you get to hear, I guess, their unique perspective through that as well.
Absolutely.
I think experience, whether that's musical training or not, is something like we all bring our experiences into everything we're doing. It's like almost impossible to not be biased. Yeah. What is possible when we don't have this set of, or this concept of how things should be, or doing it right, or working within the conventions of making proper music. So what is possible? Like how can we expand that, and what do we learn in our experiences of hearing music, of sharing experiences of going to gigs or listening to recorded music, and how to, if we're exploring that for the first time, what does that mean? What might it sound like? For sure. It's been super fun hearing everything. I realize it's getting close to 12. Maybe before we finish up, could you tell me about your band? Which one, Caleb?
Oh my gosh,
I have so many. Well, I'll talk about some of my musical projects. The first of which I'll say a bit more about being a novice performer, or at least not an expert in one thing, and being open to trying new things. I work with Matt Shu's Obscure Orchestra. Yes. Very lucky to be a member of this large ensemble that embraces different cultural and gender identities. Many of us identify as disabled or queer or First Nations. So it's nice to work within this capacity where it's not about the virtuosity, it's about the community and the joy in making music together. So that's one situation I work within. But Matt Shu, the leader, or the person who started it all, he plays all the instruments.
He does,
and
totally.
he like I recorded with him last week, and he was like, "Oh yeah, I'll just jump on the bass and play this bass line." And I was like, "Oh my god, I don't know how he does it." But I admire his ability to just do it without needing to be perfect, and then figuring out how to make it work. So that's one ensemble I've got a lot of life lessons from lately. I also am working with Eric Griswold in a band that we've named Miami Washing Machine. Could say more about it if you want, but that's so we are a duo where I play flutes, and he's played 808 and prepared piano and like sampling, and we actually make beats. So that's
awesome.
Really
I was going to ask, so it's sort of where in terms of beats does it kind of sit? Like, is it
okay? He put it nicely. It was like, what was? Oh dang it! I should have written it down. It's like 90% beats and 10% acid jazz.
Nice.
So there's this kind of like, it's very beat driven. It's very looping. But I'm playing all 4 different flutes, and I'm exploring different techniques. So sometimes the bass flute is like a really low, pumpy kind of kick drum sound.
Awesome.
Other times, I don't know, I'm just playing typical flute sounds. He does a lot of sampling, and we're figuring out ways that we can perform this live and then also have some dance moves and maybe some visuals. We just have a lot of silly ideas, and it's I guess it's fun to explore something that's outside of both of our typical ways of working. I don't make beats on a normal day, but it's when I hang out with Eric, it's really
it's beats day.
It's beats day.
Awesome.
It's pretty fun.
That's amazing. Cool. I'm really excited to.
I'm excited too.
Hear the fruits of your labor.
We're plotting our premiere. So.
We'll definitely let people know when that happens. Thanks so much, Jodie.
Thank you, Caleb. Thanks for coming over.
It's all good.
It's great.
Yeah.
Yay.